Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview presented by BookTrib.com and Merrill Moss Media. October 7th is going to mark the 14th anniversary of the beginning of the United States War on Terror in Afghanistan. Although we have reached the formal end of combat operations, the scale down of American troops in Afghanistan has been slowed. In March, it was announced that we'd maintain at least 10,000 service members in Afghanistan until the end of 2015. Now, while there are certainly healthier relationships as a result of the war, Afghanistan and the surrounding region are still not what one would consider safe. In late 2014, in neighboring Pakistan, for instance, 7 gunmen walked into the Army Public School in Peshawar, opened fire, and took the lives of 145 people, 132 of whom were children below the age of 18. Fortunately, a joint raid by American and Afghan forces resulted in the arrest of 6 Taliban members connected with the crime in 2015. In spite of the lives lost and the enormous strides the United States military and its allies have made in Afghanistan, the war itself has frequently been referred to as the Forgotten War. Our guest today has put together a book called Afghanistan on the Bounce. Here it is right here. Boots on the ground with the U.S. military and the International Assistance Force. And I promise you, if you read it, you will never see this war the same way again, nor will you ever be able to forget it. So, hello and welcome to Robert L. Cunningham.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I'd like to start with you just sort of generally telling me what is Afghanistan on the Bounce.
Afghanistan on the Bounce is a project that began in late December of 2010 and early into 2011 on the soldiers and the service members, primarily of the United States, and what was going on in Afghanistan. We as civilians, a lot of us have very little knowledge about what's really going on over there, and our people we know come home, we thank them for their service, but without a good knowledge or understanding of what they did over there, it's really hard to really know what's going on. And so myself and my co-author Steve Hartov began this project, and over the last few years we've had multiple trips into Afghanistan, both of us, to cover and work with the U.S. forces, some of our allied forces, and with the Afghan people to better understand what's going on in Afghanistan today.
Okay. How long has the military been a part of your life?
It's pretty much been a lifelong thing. Both my grandfathers served in the military. My father served in a manner of support with the military and such. So the military has always been something involved in my life from when I was a child. Even when I was in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher talks about how I said I was going to grow up to be a pilot soldier, and so it was always been something in my life. And then when in 2005, I was medically disqualified from active duty due to fibromyalgia, a muscle and connective tissue disorder that didn't allow me to serve. And so after that, I went in a different way.
Was that, I'm assuming up until that point, up until 2005, you were pretty certain that this was going to be your future, the military?
Yeah, I was certainly set on it. I was pretty aggressively set on it. And then even in 2004, when I started testing for the military, it was a process. I didn't quit. I kept going back until they told me to not come back, and so it was kind of one of those things where I pushed very hard to serve. But when that ticket came up and said that's not going to happen, I had to find another way.
That must have been a pretty tough blow to find out you couldn't do it.
It was a really hard one to deal with, and it took me a long time to deal with and come to terms with the fact that if that was the case, there was something else out there that I should be doing. And I always have since told people, when you get a no in your life, you should celebrate it as much as when you get a yes. Because had I gotten in and served, I would have done a very crucial thing, but I would not have been able to go over there and do what I did. And I've heard from countless soldiers and service members that I've been with over there that they're really proud of what we did with the book and proud of what we did over there. And I would never have been able to have brought that or done that had I gotten in. So in our lives, we never really know what reality is going to take, and we can hope for what we hope for, and then just, in my opinion, celebrate a no just as much as you celebrate a yes.
I think you certainly did that with the process to get embedded there and start taking these pictures. How did that process begin? When did you make the decision that this is how you were going to help?
I was working in a shop here in Phoenix, and a friend of mine and I were sitting around discussing. He was a former military guy, and we were discussing my frustrations of watching everyone I knew and loved and cared about going over, and me being stuck here at home, and how it just didn't feel right. And so I sat and talked with him, and he looked at me and said, "You're pretty good with a camera." And I said, "So?" He said, "Have you ever thought about being an embed?" And so it was with his behest that I finally, started filling out the paperwork and looked into it. And then with the great help of a guy named Josh Williams, who was a reporter back in New York that I met, he also helped spur me into that. And with a simple conversation that I'm not even sure he still remembers, but it was a life-altering conversation for me.
What was it just like a sort of, you should go do this conversation?
We were on the boat headed out to the Statue of Liberty, and I noticed that he had a tattoo on his arm of a camera, and so I started a conversation with him over the camera, and he mentioned that he was an embed in Iraq, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. How did you go about doing that? And he said it's a lot different than what people would think, and so he sat and kind of walked me through while we were on that. He was headed out to the statue. There was a report that the statue had a fire going on in it, which turned out to be inaccurate, as we found out later. But it was just interesting because it was with that conversation that I started to think, once in our life, when we see somebody doing something that we want to do, it helps when you meet somebody that's actually doing it. And when you meet somebody that's actually there, I mean, if you want to be an actor or whatever, and then you meet an actor, you realize, okay, they're human. They've done it. So how do I do that? And so it kind of opens doors when you get to see that it's an achievable path.
So you start going through this process to become an embed, and how long were you in Afghanistan on the tour that it took to do Afghanistan on the bounce?
Well, Afghanistan on the bounce covers the first two trips. The first trip was 3 months with the 1st Infantry Division, which was kind of an anomaly. A lot of the journalists and embeds go for a week or 7 days, 4 days, somewhere in that range. So to go for 3 months and live with the guys and go out to the little bases and not just the large places, that was a rarity. And then I returned in 2012. As we were getting the book finished, I realized there were a few things that we didn't quite get, and so we went back in 2012 for 2 weeks. Then I returned in 2014 for another 2 weeks with in 2012 was with the Air Force Central Command. 2011 was with the 1st Infantry Division. 2014 was with primarily the 101st Airborne Division, and then so that was the trip so far, but the book contains the first 2 trips.
I'm interested, there's this part in the book, I think the chapter is called Tears on the Tarmac, and it's about service members leaving. And what I was curious about, it's a really emotional part of the book, but I was wondering about your own experience in leaving, and what was it like to be leaving and also taking pictures of other people leaving?
It's an odd feeling because it's very similar to when you leave on a vacation or something like that. But the difference is, of course, on this vacation, people get shot at, and unfortunately, people die. And so the feeling is a very weird feeling as you're saying goodbye to people that you love and care about, and you find yourself kind of second guessing, what the last thing you should say to them is. And then, in the case of the one that's featured in Tears on the Tarmac, one of them was a Marine Corps leaving one, and it was very interesting to witness because they showed up, they talked, whatever, and then all of a sudden they were like gone. I mean, the bus showed up and they're on it and they're gone. And it was this feeling of almost like a Band-Aid being ripped off where you didn't have a whole lot of time to sit and think about it. It was just boom. And then, of course, you have the ride home, and you sit there and you wonder about it and worry about it then. But, as far as myself going, it didn't really hit me until I reached Dubai. And as a civilian, the way that I get into Afghanistan is through Dubai usually. And a lot of the contractors go that way. And at 5 in the morning when I woke up and I realized that I was about to hop a flight and go to Afghanistan, that's when it really hit me, and I pulled out my audio recorder and made some personal notes about it, and that was just kind of this, okay, wow, it's real now, and so it was quite an interesting feeling.
So there are two names on this book. There is Robert L. Cunningham, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Stephen Hartog. Why don't you tell me about his role in the book?
Steve, kind of, it's one of those things. I gotta encourage you people that are listening to just, if you want something, just go for it. And I know I sound like Shia LaBeouf there, sorry, but
Do it.
it's just do it.
Just do it.
It's just one of those things, because when we were writing the book, I was looking for somebody. I'm as a photographer, my words sometimes fail me, and so I was looking for somebody who could really word what I needed properly. And so I had bounced around, looked at a couple of different authors, and talked to a couple of different people. In the publication that I was working with, publishing house Inside Editions out of Northern California, a great company to work with, by the way. They put me in contact with somebody, and it just wasn't the right fit. And so I sat there and I pulled off the shelf one of my favorite books that was a military book written by Steve Hartog. And I actually Googled the man's information, and I sent him an email. And within about 2 hours, he called and he said, "Hello, I'm Stephen Hartog. I'm, want to talk to you about this email." He goes, I'm very interested in this project. I just finished some of the other ones, and I was looking at my computer and saying, "What do I do now?" And your email came through. And that was the beginning of a heck of a good friendship. I mean, Steve is by far just one of the coolest guys you'll ever get to meet, and very knowledgeable. And he himself has gone to Afghanistan and worked over there as well. And so he was there. If you remember the plane crash at Bagram, that was such a horrific situation that was caught on video. Steve was present when that occurred. He's been there, done that just as much as any of the other guys. And getting Steve to be able to word exactly what I was feeling, I would sit and talk with him and say, "Okay, this is what I want. This is what I'm feeling." I'd talk for an hour, and then in 10 minutes he would type something up and read it to me, and it'd be perfect. And so Steve is such an integral part of this, and it would have been impossible to do without him.
Let's jump to a viewer question that I think is a really interesting question that I want to get your viewpoint on. And that's from Brittany Slay. She asks, what do you think about trans rights in the military?
By the way, real quick before I answer that, down there you guys can submit questions. So any of our people that are watching, feel free to pop some questions down there, please.
Go for that.
First and foremost, I'd like to say happy birthday to Brittany, because if I'm not mistaken, I think it's your birthday today. Brittany, this is a wonderful question. It's one of those things that it's a very touchy subject when it's very, people have their own opinions and split it right down the middle. But in the reality is, I'm for human rights, period. And what somebody does with their own personal thing, and this, please understand, this is my opinion, not anyone else's, but what they do in their personal life or how they feel is their own business. And I have friends of mine that may or may not have been trans. I have friends that are gay. I have friends of all walks of life, and it irritates me when I see people who make a big deal over it. I mean, when I fill out a form, I don't have to say that I'm a heterosexual male. So why should they have to disclose what they felt, what they were born with, and where they are now? I mean, it's not a point in my opinion. I think to make a big deal out of it hurts the cohesion that's required in combat. But I mean, we had people of all walks of life that we were with over there, and I think that the country as a whole is waking up to this. The world as a whole is waking up to this, and I think that it won't be long until the military just says, "So what? We don't care what's going on in your pants or your shirt. We don't care about that. We care about what you do when you're in the uniform." And I owe my life to people that were, we had a guy that was with me that took really good care of me that, nobody knew was gay until he got out. And then he said, "By the way, I'm gay." It doesn't matter to me. And in all reality, it doesn't matter to a lot of the soldiers that I've been with. People have their own prejudices and their own viewpoints, and that's their entitlement. But I think that it's one of those things that I'm for human rights, period. I don't care whether any classification. If we all have blood, we all human, and that's how I personally feel.
All right. So yeah, everybody watching, please do submit questions. We will do our best to answer them in the time that we have. I want to hear a little bit about when you got to Afghanistan. You said you came through to Dubai. When you got to Afghanistan, what were your initial responses?
The first thing I did was I defaulted into just doing my job, and so the first thing I did was quite literally on the aircraft before I stepped off. I reached in my pocket and pulled out my auto recorder, and I began it running, and I wanted to keep track of the exact second, I touched ground. I wanted to record that, and I rambled on for a little while like I am now. About just what I was feeling and seeing. And it was interesting to me. The first thing I heard was a 6.2 liter diesel engine, the rattle of a Humvee as it drove by on the tarmac, and that was very welcoming. My grandfather had an old truck like that, and so that was a very welcoming sound. So it was just very human. And then it was first trying to move with everybody and figure out, because you're standing on a tarmac, you're acting differently than you're not in a terminal, and just getting to kind of familiarize yourself. It's just like showing up the first day at school, which is very accurate because I learned a lot more than at some of my classes I learned in Afghanistan. But it was just kind of this new feeling of, what do I do now?
And you were wearing that thing behind you, weren't you, most of the time?
I was actually wearing a different version of this one. This particular vest system came from a buddy of mine who was actually in Afghanistan. I was complaining about the suit I had, and he's all like, "No, you need to get something a little bit better." So this setup is actually was kind of inspired by his armor. But yeah, this is what I wear every time when I'm out there. Whenever we're going outside the wire, it's the body armor. It's got the different rifle plates and such. My mother, there you can see the classic one there. And my mother's not very pleased about how little it actually protects there, because with this it just protects on the plate and such. But it is what it is. But then we've got the helmet, which the fun part about this helmet is this helmet has been to Afghanistan more times than I have. This was my helmet when I was first there, and then a good friend of mine, when he went over, he brought it, and he actually signed the inside of it with his name and such.
Wow.
But so he carried it in Afghanistan. This is his light that he sent with me, and so it's kind of a neat little thing, because I've known that this protected me and it protected my good friend, and it's kind of neat when you have a little bit of a pedigree with the equipment and gear that you carry.
A lot of your experience in Afghanistan is, I think, very well reflected in the book, both in pictures and in text. I was wondering, is there anything you really wanted to be in the book that, for whatever reason, isn't?
Yeah, there was countless ones of that, because as we started doing it and going through the process, there was a lot of we had to pick and decide what we put in and what we didn't put in, and it was kind of rough, because we had so much different content from so many different soldiers and service members that I was over there. The idea of how the book was going to shape up changed over the time, and so there's certainly a lot of images and stories and such. But when we first started writing this book, we had to pick the theme, and when we picked the theme of how it was going to be worded and such, that narrows down a lot of what you could show. So we've always hoped to release either a second book in this series, or in another book that maybe just related to photography or otherwise include a lot of that stuff that never made it in.
I think this is sort of a touching on another viewer question that Brittany had. I'm going to modify it slightly. She asked for you to share a funny story from your experience overseas. What I'm asking is, what's your happiest memory from Afghanistan? What's the first thing that pops into your mind?
What's the happiest memory of Afghanistan?
The happiest, yeah.
Of all the time there, I would have to say one of the happy memories I've had would be from we had gone out on some missions, and we had gotten back, and there was a guy there that had spent some time custom building a fire pit on the base. He had worked very hard to use some 2x4s and build this. And when I say that, that's an understatement. I mean, it had benches and it had all this stuff. And we're at this little tiny base in the middle of nowhere. with only a few hundred people, small combat infantrymen, combat outpost. And this guy's built this entire deck, and it's like this deck and a fire pit in the middle of it. And the soldiers came after a mission. They would sit down and smoke some cigarettes and drink some water, and a real raging party. And some of the guys brought out their guitars, and we're sitting here singing, songs, and like some of the songs I knew, some of them I didn't, but we're all sitting there and they're all singing along to songs and just jamming out in Afghanistan in the middle of the night. And it's like, a few minutes before and a few hours after, these guys were getting shot at. But so this moment of peace, of this moment of, hey, we're just gonna, we're gonna sit here and we're gonna rock out, was like one of the coolest things. And so I jokingly referenced that in the back of the book. I mentioned the Cop Nariza comedy hour or something like that. Brady's fireside musical and comedy show at Nariza, and that's a reference to Jason Brady who did this, and it was really neat to see. So I'd say that would be one of them. Now, a funny story. I had to sit and think about this because it has to be a story that doesn't get anybody in trouble. And of course, if you spend any time with the military, a lot of the funny stories get people in trouble. So I won't say any names, but it was funny. Just as I was getting ready to leave Afghanistan the first time, I had gone from combat outpost where it was pretty heavy firefights and stuff like that going on in the area, and I rotated on my way out to Bagram, which is it's like a U.S. city in many cases. It's huge, and it's a different world than what you see at the little bases. And as I was standing there, I went to the kitchen at Bagram, and I was like, man, I got to get some food. It's like midnight, and this specialist comes in. He's all like, hey, I know you just came in from one of the little bases and you're getting ready to go, so you know what? I got something special for you. And so he cracks open this refrigerator, and he pulls out a paper bag with 2 lobster tails in it. And I'm like, are you kidding? Lobster tails in Afghanistan? And so he pops out a pan and he boils up the lobster, and we're sitting there and we're eating the lobster, and we finished the lobster, and I've got my plate and I'm still kind of like nibbling away at this, going, I'm almost in tears because I've just come from like where we didn't have power to this, and all of a sudden this colonel comes into the kitchen, and this colonel walks over to the thing, opens up the refrigerator, and just explodes. Where are my lobster tails? Who's touched my lobster tails? I had those custom flown in. Those are all, who? And I'm sitting there with the plate, and I'm like, hide this back here,
Right.
And this specialist comes in and goes, I don't know where your lobster tails are. And he looks over at me, who are you? And I'm like, I'm just a photographer. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. And it was just this moment of when the colonel left, I looked at the specialist, and he's like, we're not going to tell anybody about this, are you? And I'm like, nope. And so we stole the colonel's lobster tail. So I guess that would be one of the funny stories that I don't think the specialist intended to. But he knew that if he was ever caught being the one that did it, he'd have a lot of problems.
You mentioned leaving just there in the beginning of that story. Was it hard to leave Afghanistan?
Yeah. In many aspects, I didn't. I never have. Leaving Afghanistan. I was there long enough to appreciate it, not long enough to really hate it. I know a lot of soldiers come back and hate the place, but I also know a lot of the soldiers that come back and kind of miss some of the stuff that went on there, and miss the people, and miss kind of living with a purpose every day, doing something. And it's kind of one of those hard balances, because leaving Afghanistan the first time, I ended up leaving a day or two early, and I wasn't very pleased with that. And there was it was just, I kind of felt like it was unfinished business, and that was one of the reasons why I went back in 2012. And then again, long about 2014, I'm sitting there itching to go back, and it's one of those things that will never leave me. And there was a lot of positives, a lot of negatives, and as with anything, the further we get away from it, the less we focus on the negatives, and the more we kind of whitewash kind of what we think it is. That sounds like a bad term. I think I might get in trouble for that term. Sorry if that was a bad term. We just kind of put rose-colored glasses on and forget the bad times. And so when we go back, it's a different feeling. And then we get there, and it's rough, and you're like, why am I doing this again? But it'll always be with me.
Do you think that's a pretty common thing among service members?
I've seen it pretty common, yeah. I mean, it just depends. I mean, obviously, it's one or the other. I see a lot of guys that really would never go back if you paid them, and I see a lot of guys that really want to go back. And so it just depends on the person. It depends on the experience,
Mhm.
and but the reality is I think the commonality is the experience itself. So maybe sometimes just sitting around talking about it's better than just going back.
I think one of probably the most depressing things about the state of the military these days is the phenomenally high suicide rate. And I was wondering, as someone who has experience being close to service members in pretty intimate settings, what do you think is happening? Why are these numbers so high? And is there anything people can do on an individual basis to help service members that they may know?
I've been asked this question a lot, and the more I've thought about it, and I sat and talked with a bunch of guys, and the best answer that I can give is the primary reason that I think our service members have a hard time when they come home is a lack of understanding. When you can be lonely when you're alone, and it's worse when you're lonely when you're with other people. And when we're with a lot of people that don't understand, who have never gone, or have no bearing of understanding exactly what life is like over there, what you do go through, it becomes a very hard place to be emotionally. And so the biggest thing that I can do is, and hope that we can do with this book, which I've been pleased to hear from some service members that we've done, and that is we start breaking down that line of communication between the civilian who has never gone, who doesn't have a good perspective of understanding what life was like there, to just better understand it, which allows them to kind of open it. So I think a lot of the suicide rate is due to the fact that there is a stigma in this country sometimes. Our vets aren't getting taken care of the way they are, but more to the point, when everyone just assumes something about you, they think one way about you or the otherwise, and you don't communicate, it becomes a very a lonely existence to be in. And our vets need to know that they're cared about and such. And that brings me to the thought process of something else we haven't talked about, and that is the politicalness of the book. The book has no politics. It's not a right-wing book. It's not a left-wing book. It's not a pro-military. It's not an anti-military. It's none of that. When I wrote the book, I had two people in mind. I had a service member I was with, Raymond Drebnak, in mind, and I had a friend of mine, Jackie Stevenson, who has a polar opposite opinion in many things than I do. And so we wrote the book in a manner that there's no politics in it. This is what it is. This is what life is like over there. And you come away with better knowledge, a deeper knowledge of it, and it'll just solidify or modify your views in the sense of you'll have better understanding and better knowledge about it. But it's not political in any way, shape, or form. It's not a pro-military or anti-military book. It's just, hey, this is the experience. And in my opinion, that's what journalism should be. Journalism should just be documentation. It should just be showing what's really going on without political view, without editorializing, without putting your stuff in there. Because once you do that and you put yourself into the story, then it's not a story. Then you're showing something, you're entertaining rather than actually just reporting on what's going on.
Right. Are you going back to Afghanistan?
Yes. The paperwork has just come through this morning. I will be returning in a relatively soon amount of time to Afghanistan, so it's really good that we got to be here right now because here very soon I will begin my journey back to Afghanistan for a fourth time, and I'm very excited about that. When we applied to go back, you never know. It's kind of hard to get in, especially now as the mission's getting wound down and our troop numbers are so small and the logistics are so hard. So when we applied to go back, we expected a no, but as of this morning, we got information that we'll be returning. And I see a question here coming in that says how long I will be there. Obviously, for the protection of everybody involved, I can't give exact specific details, but I can tell you that it will be longer than a couple weeks and shorter than a couple months.
All right. We are just closing out here. We usually do a rapid fire question and answer session, but I thought for this book we'd do something a little bit different. So what we're going to do, because the visuals here are just so moving, I thought I will hold up an image from the book, and I want you to tell me the first 3 words that pop in your head. It could be about, the history of the image or just how you were emotionally moved by it, anything like that, but it has to be only 3 words, okay?
Oh, this is going to be a trick. I got to watch my language.
It's going to be a trick. It's going to be hard. Here we go.
He's got a gun.
It's very factual.
The first thought I saw that was, oh God, he's got a gun.
He's got a gun.
Waiting for grain.
I would ask you to explain these, but I think they're better as mysteries, actually.
Oh, that's good.
All right, let's see.
It does what? It's like Mystery Science Theater.
It sure is. Just a few more. Here we go.
Love, duty, and honor. Patriot profiles all.
Even the dogs. A few dogs in that one.
And Combat Santa, if you can find him, too.
I did find him. It was like, where's Waldo? All right, last one. Here we go.
Heartbreaking. Tears. Sadness.
And if you read the book, which everyone here should, you'll know why those answers, because it is spelled out what that is. Robert, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I very much appreciate it. And is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask any further questions, you can go on to Facebook to facebook.com/RLCUNN and find my Facebook page there, and you can ask questions. I just got a text message from someone letting me know that we need to be a little louder. I hope that you guys could hear. Sorry that we just got that now. But if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to hop over there to facebook.com/RLCUNN. And you'll find Robert L. Cunningham, photographer, author there. And feel free to shoot me a message, post on the wall, do whatever you need to, and I'll be glad to get right back to you guys.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you at the next author interview.
My privilege.